While the Strohbachs contemplated their immigration to Australia, I was advised by government officials that if I wanted to have nothing to do with Turkey, I should consider doing the same, as there was no guarantee that I could stay in Germany permanently. However, there were several other options, and the Strohbachs were keen to try them, one of which was to adopt me as their son. They explained that it would please them immensely if they could later pass their wealth on to me. They were going to try what had not been successfully tried before, but which was worth considering. They applied for political asylum on my behalf, and after several interviews, it looked promising. A long while passed, and I heard nothing in regard to that application, assuming it was successful. In the meantime, the Strohbachs had applied for migration to Australia in earnest, and were subjected to several health checks and interviews. When they received the final invitation, their application being successful for an assisted passage to the land down under, they were extremely surprised about Australia's whites-only policy. When they left, I had to find different accommodation, and there was a place in a nearby suburb where I could stay as long as I wanted. The house I was going to move into was owned by a wonderfully pleasant Sister Nurk, the widow of a war veteran. She did not go to a church or kingdom hall for age-related health reasons, but was happy to accommodate me and have someone to share her thoughts and memories with. She treated me as if I was her son. She gladly washed my clothing, changed my bedding, and sometimes cooked food, which included herb and vegetable soups, although it was not my preference, but I appreciated her efforts. Her house belonged to the old world, and was reasonably sized. In front of her lounge room, outside the large window, there was a brick-walled attachment, an architectural oddity originating from the olden days when it belonged to a farm, and although now empty, it most definitely stank like pig droppings. Obviously, it was once used by the farmers for compost, for even after all those years, one could still smell it. Sister Nurk claimed it smelled like Limburger cheese. Strangely, it did not bother me. Often I found her silently reading the Bible, and she loved talking about the good Lord. I paid her a small amount of rent for the room I occupied, and also gave her extra cash towards food and energy bills. She was very happy. The authorities assured me that if I decided to marry a German citizen, my circumstances would also change accordingly. My stay would become permanent, and after some time I could apply for German citizenship. However, much later I was informed by the same authority that due to unexpected discrepancies with the Turkish government, they could stop my education and force me to go back to Turkey. What a change of heart! Apparently my father was demanding some authorities to help his son to be forced to return to Turkey and complete the conscripted military service. I was not certain about that, and feeling extremely devastated by this new development, I wondered why he, who never wanted me to live in the first place, was now forcing this issue. Was it a diplomatic lie by their government? If I went back, I would have to break my education, abandon all my friends and undertakings, just to fulfill his desires. I could not believe it. In other words, they were probably encouraged to charge me as a military escapee if I did not want to have anything to do with what was demanded of me, even subjecting me to imprisonment or hefty sums of money to pay. Who knows, I could even be shot, as it used to be during the war years, thus fulfilling my father's original wish. This could have been in the plan. However, I could not completely believe him to be that wicked, and could not imagine being put together with extremely mediocre-minded soldiery to dull my mind completely for about 2 years. The Turkish authorities might have seen this fit when dealing with members of minority groups. My father had allegedly told the authorities that I could study and go to overseas countries after I had done my most important service to the country. If it was at all true, could he perhaps have meant it as being a service to him? The surprising issue here was that he was an adamant and utterly one-track-minded person who could not see anything ahead of him, just bent with his dreamt-of desires. This issue became like a black smoke one had to blow away. I had to write to both the German and Turkish authorities that I had completely divorced my father and was never going to return to Turkey. What about my original standing? Besides, why in the first place did he write in French to the French government to be accepted back, secretly asking me to post it all that time ago? What did he really mean with being accepted back? This is when I started my inquiries about migrating either to Canada or Australia. Since I was still studying and contemplating furthering my education after finalization of my courses, I decided to emigrate to one of those countries, convinced that it would be the end of the story. At one point I was invited to the Turkish General Consulate in Germany, just to be told that my parents, still living in Turkey, had not heard from me for a long time, and I should correspond with them. It was extremely unusual to be invited there just to be told to correspond with my parents. On the other hand, I was curious whether the Schroebachs had been blocking all correspondence with my parents due to their fear of possible influence from the devil, as they did before with things my mother had sent. Logically, I thought my mother or brother would have written to me direct on such a mundane issue. They might have, but if those letters had been confiscated by my Jehovah's Witness friends, that would have created the problem. Perhaps the Turkish officials were just checking on me if I was real and willing to go back to their country, or perhaps they just wanted to discover exactly where I was. That worried me a lot, and I felt as if I was hunted like an international criminal. I did not want to be bothered about anything else other than my studies, my part-time jobs, and romantic interests. I believe my mother was extremely pleased with my achievements, and if I married the girl I loved, she would be happy. I was not sure about my father and other relatives who never considered me as an intelligent individual, but I certainly had no need to prove to them who I was. However, there was yet another dark cloud over my head, and that was my mother's belief that Jehovah's Witnesses were taking her beloved son away. If my correspondence with her had not been hindered by the witnesses, she would have known the truth. I was certainly not owned by them. Before the Schroebachs left for Australia, they recommended that we, meaning me and Magda, follow them to the land down under. They were intending to settle in Tasmania. Before furthering my story, let me tell you some other intriguing memories recalled. While my romantic affair with Magda became more meaningful, I was very cautious and hoped that I was not being sucked into a situation one could not easily escape from. Soon my initial misgivings subsided, and I felt that I was definitely in love. But did she feel the same? Finally, there came a time when we spoke about marriage and having a honeymoon somewhere in the Swiss or Austrian Alps. Magda was quite excited about the prospect of having a family of her own, perhaps overly enthusiastic, while I envisaged remaining forever friends as a married couple into our ripe old age. I envisaged holding hands and walking the fields with her, even when we were 100, and enjoying each other's company as true friends in love. Probably it was nothing more than a pleasant dream on my part. Was I an idealist and did not realize it? I attempted to communicate with my mother about my desire to get married, hoping that she and my brother could see us in France or Germany, for I did not wish to visit Turkey for reasons I have already spoken of. Unfortunately, due to being considered a foreign dog, I preferred never to go near that country again. By some political miracle, if their attitude changed towards those they called infidels, considering them unworthy to be called humans, maybe then I could visit that country, rich with a colorful history and natural beauty. It is such a beautiful place, and anybody visiting it would almost certainly fall in love with it. Call it what you will, but I found it so intriguing that when we went for our adventurous honeymoon, after an extraordinarily unusual wedding, the place we planned to stay was fully booked, and other available accommodations were less than ideal. But we found a delightful small hotel. It was called Tokai, which in German translates into Turkey. I shall tell you more about it in a while. The idea of me getting married would please my mother, and seeing my relatives with my future spouse would even be more delightful. But perhaps that was never to eventuate. I never wanted to see my father ever again, and certainly never wanted to be forced into any possible conflict with him, and into conscription in a country which was not my home. Who could guess what the future had in store for us? But for now, there was no other choice for me to follow. If life had it in its plan, one day we could meet my parents somewhere in Europe, maybe in France. Alas, the Strohbachs had a very fixed idea about my mother being a witch, and considered any connection with her on my part as being a grievous mistake, an unforgivable sin. Since they were the servants of a gracious God Jehovah, as they claimed, they could never allow anything like fortune-telling, which my mother was allegedly engaged in by reading coffee grounds into their sanctified lives. Whenever my mother sent me little gifts which would have cost her large sums of money, the Strohbachs burned them. I can never forget the specially handcrafted winter boots, which she sent without my knowledge, apparently taking a long while to burn completely, afterwards seemingly forming into figures akin to human bones and vertebrae. They were visibly very happy about their achievement, just as I have already mentioned in detail. Neither can I ever forget that hand-finished and very expensive rug. It was apparently woolen and took a very long time to burn, and this time they said it looked like a whole human skeleton after its destruction. As one can sense, my memories keep on repeating. I cannot forget how enthusiastically they told me all about their actions long afterwards, so that I could do nothing. Nor could I be tempted to rescue them. I was so certain that they have burned every single card or letter sent by my mother, whom they had never met or spoken to. They insisted that they did not want to have any influence of her black art, for it was evil and should always be avoided if we wanted to please Jehovah.